Leaders, or myself, Andy at Strategy Leaders. You can also, if you want a copy of the webinar, or if you would like to get a copy of our exit planning timeline, we're happy to send that out as well. And for those of you who did have a chance to weigh in, we've got a little mix of everybody. The most of you are in fact business owners, a few employees, few advisors, and some other people who are, I assume, here out of curiosity and have checked that other box. So welcome to all of you. I hope that this webinar gets you started on what is an incredibly important journey. If, as I said earlier, if you have any questions as we go along, put them in the chat window or email them to Caroline, and she will then send them or save them for the end of the webinar, and we'll get started with questions at the end of the webinar. In terms of Strategy Leaders, let me give you a little bit of background on us. As I said earlier, we're a business consulting firm with a proud history of working successfully with owners of privately held businesses. We will tell you a few war stories today. Our focus is getting the right client at the right time and for the right reason. And there are a variety of ways that we do help our customers, from building growth and development and business plans to transitioning next generations, whether that's family members or employees, into the business and getting that fully implemented. We do work with both buyers and sellers who are working their way through the process of entry or exit and helping to get a deal negotiated and finalized. We provide business owners valuations, and we actually will have a webinar next month that will dig more into that. And we also work with business owners on developing their KPIs, key performance indicators. We do a lot of management team development and actually have separate programming for that. Many of our clients, once they've gone through our development program, will come back to us and ask us to then come back and work their management team through the process so that they're capable of running the business. And then we do a fair amount of family-owned preparation and negotiation. I would say that over half of our practice is family-owned businesses, and I think that's because most businesses, one way or another, are family owned, and you'll see that in some of the numbers we'll present later on today. If you do have questions, we're happy to meet with you, and we don't charge for that. We're happy to explore the possibilities. We probably talk to 1,000 people a year and end up working with a couple of handfuls, and the rest of them we give advice on where they want to look and what they want to be looking for. Our whole mission is to see that companies continue successfully from one generation to the other. And I know that there are people in this audience who are interested in that. And that really makes my heart warm. So welcome today, and I hope you get what you need. In terms of today's topics, we're going to look at current buy-sell conditions. And then we're going to talk about the challenges that business owners face as they look at exiting the business and what gets in the way of being successful at that. We're going to talk about what you can prepare to do for exit, and then we're going to have a recap of the to-dos. Well, let's get going. In terms of today's market, it's impossible to talk about exiting the business without touching on COVID considerations. Lots of people coming into 2020 were thinking they might sell or getting ready to sell, and then had their plans set aside as markets hit turbulence. In addition to that, buyers were also eager to buy and then put the brakes on, as they were not entirely clear about who was going to make it through COVID and who wasn't. And now what we find is that there's a lot of businesses that have reported declines from 19 into 20, coming out of 20, rebuilding in 21. A lot of companies that are not as confident about their financial condition. There are a lot of companies that don't expect sales to normalize until 22 or 23, or even later than that, depending on the type of industry. I think it's really interesting to note, for example, those who are in the travel industry in particular were hard hit. In New York City, in 2020, we did 1/6 of the revenue in New York City related to travel and tourism that we had done in 2019. I mean, that just is, I think that that statistic tells it all. There are a lot of people who are working on repairing both their business and personal finances, or thinking, there are others who are thinking about how to expand, what resources they need to do it. Many companies are dealing with limited access to either banking or leasing capital to bridge gaps, as again, the banks and the leasing companies have questions about who's going to make it, who's not. The PPP bailouts were critical to the success and survival of a lot of companies, as is the EIDL program, which is now quickly coming to an end. PPP is done. That's not coming back. EIDL will end by the end of this year. If you have not applied for EIDL loans, I encourage you seriously to think about those. The PPP were grants. The EIDL is actually a loan that will have to be paid back, but it has a 30-year term on it, which gives you a lot of time to figure out how to use the money at a very limited payout until you get the wheels rolling. As a result of all of this, many owners are facing general uncertainty about what to do next, how hard to fight for the business, and what an exit really can look like for them, and then questions about go now or go later. So when it comes to selling the business and looking for buyers, there are 3 distinct age groups at play, and each age group has very different motivations and capabilities. Let's get to know each other a little bit more with the next poll question. So I'm going to talk you through this slide, and then if you would check on the following question box, if you want to bring up the question box, Dahlia, for the next poll question, and let's get to know what bucket you each fall into. So we've given you a bucket for baby boomers, Gen X's, millennials, and we even included the Gen Zs in here. I'm curious to see if we have anyone in that group yet. And we've given you the age groups to look at. As soon as you click your answer, I think you can get the slide to go away and get out of your way. As we look at the baby boomers, this is the group that is typically about age 57 to 75, and it is time for them to retire, think about retiring, or get out of the business with a planning process that's going to make them whole as they look at what they're going to need in retirement. And that is a large chunk of who we're talking to here. If you look at the next generation down, Gen X, what's interesting about this group is that there's just over about 2.5 million businesses that are owned by Gen Xers. And this group is age 41 to 56. The majority of the people in the Gen X generation who are going to come in as buyers probably have already done so. That's why we say this group is in full swing. And then the next group, which is the millennials, age 25 to 40, they're just getting started as buyers. There are less than 1 million companies owned by millennials. We expect this group to grow significantly over the next several years as they build the resources and have the wherewithal to begin engaging as business owners. So let's take a look at the answers on this group. So the majority of the folks here, I'm not surprised, are baby boomers, followed by Gen Xers and then millennials. And we don't have any Gen Zs in the audience yet. This webinar is going to be for all of you, and you probably will pay attention and have different takeaways depending on which of these groups you fit into. And here is something that I want you all to think about. And there is right now a widening gap between sellers and buyers. So on this graph, the buyers are the sellers, sorry, are represented by the red line. The buyers are represented by the green line, and this is over time. And as you can see, the number of buyers is decreasing and the number of sellers is increasing. That's primarily because baby boomers, as they are aging out, more and more of their businesses are coming onto the selling market, and very few baby boomers remain as potential buyers. As I said, the Gen Xers have passed their peak buying numbers. They're mostly in, and we're waiting for the millennials to grow financial muscle to be able to participate. So the thing to think about here is that when the gap widens between sellers and buyers, it becomes a buyer's market. And what the buyers have to be very cognizant about is the challenge that they're going to be facing, or the opportunities that they're going to be facing as buyers to get in. It gives them more flexibility, and the sellers may have less flexibility and less price control. Now, let's talk about some of the challenges that here's one of the biggest challenges that business owners are facing when they make that transition from being used to running a company to planning to sell. And while in the business, owners typically have sacrificed a chunk of their personal future to build the company. They often have ended up working harder than necessary. They may have made less than they can. That happens quite often. And they're expecting to fill the gaps when they exit, but instead, because they aren't prepared for that transition, and they don't get a lot of practice on how to sell the company, they end up leaving a lot of money on the table at the time of exit. And because of that, they don't make up for what they may have left on the table in order to build the business. And that's something that we're going to work on trying to fix as we go through this webinar. Here's another challenge for owners who are getting ready to exit. The stats show that the expectations of who that might buy the business based on the owner's perception of who might buy, which is over here on the left, don't actually turn into who actually buys in all cases. A big chunk of the fall off is in the belief that the family will want the business, and the transition of the business to employees is very low. We think you need to rethink that one. And down here at the bottom, these two percentages, 20% keep going with no clear path to exit, and 40% close and liquidate. So what that really means is that 60% of business owners don't get a deal transacted as they expected. They just keep going until they can't. And then at that point, they fall off into that second box of close or liquidate. And what that means is they don't get to monetize or profit from the asset they've spent all these years building. And this is a serious consequence that we should all be actively working to avoid as we go through the building process. So now I just talked about the 40% of business owners not monetizing their sweat equity. Let's turn to the information behind that and what every business owner needs to be thinking about. You have to start with understanding your personal wealth and your personal needs. My recommendation is to calculate the facts and get advisors who can help you do that. In other words, get what you want out of get what you want in retirement by knowing what you will need and then building and working a plan to get there. So calculate your retirement, how much you're going to need. Don't expect that anyone else is going to solve your personal retirement plan issues. This is on you to solve. Define your timeline, write out a plan, and figure out what it's going to take to get from where you are to filling in any gaps in what you need or want to retire the way you want to retire. Now, you have to change your mindset as you prepare to shift from running your business to selling the asset. And here are some things to ponder. What are you going to do next? What's the business worth? Who might want that business? What tools exist for buyers to take it over? And what are you going to have to learn to succeed at this brand new game of selling the business? And 40% of business owners say they don't have retirement savings. Most owners lack a clear understanding of exit value and overestimate the value. We'll talk about that a lot more in the next webinar that we're doing in December that's all about valuations. As I said earlier, there is competition for scarce number of buyers. 75% of business owners don't have a written transferable operating plan, and 90% have not developed written exit strategies, nor have they practiced to build exit skill. So this is what I want you all thinking about as we go into the solutions that you have to deal with in order to be successful at exiting. And just one more piece of pain here. So if you could launch the next poll question, and let's look at the issues that business owners cite regularly as obstacles to exiting. And I'm going to ask you all to take a minute and read through this slide and check off all of the ones that apply to you. So you can check as many as you want. And I'm actually going to bring that up, and we're going to talk about this on the next slide and in just a minute. Robert or Dahlia, let me know when we're ready to move on.
Just a few more minutes, I think.
Okay, great. I'll give you all a chance to think your way through what are the challenges I'm going to be facing. And I would say that this is a list of really common issues that plague so many small businesses throughout the lifespan of the business, actually. But then they come home to roost at the time of exit. And you have to be aware that you can't fix this stuff overnight, but unless this stuff gets addressed, the price and viability of the sale tend to suffer. And the result is that then as an owner, you don't end up getting what you want when it's time to sell. So we're going to work on what to do about this list, but let's understand where the priorities are coming from the audience before we move on. And hopefully I've got you thinking now about what you're going to have to deal with in the time that you have left from now to exit. So let's take a look at the answers. Okay, biggies: lack of plans, short-term focus, lack of succession and replacement plans for key players, lack of an exit strategy or generational transfer program. The business is owner dependent. We see that a ton. The business sits all on my shoulders. And lack of an internal structure are really big ones. And I would say that actually is, they're all interlinked, folks. And every one of these did get checked by a few people. So there's nothing on this list that went unchecked. And I'm not surprised by that, but I am concerned about it. Now, hopefully I've got you thinking here, and we will come back to this slide and talk more about how to deal with this. But I want you to launch the next webinar question. And can you bring up the next poll question, please? Because going hand in hand with this list of issues is the question of how much time do I have? So in this one, I'd like you all to check off what you think is the best answer for you. An extra year, an extra 2 to 3 years, 4 to 5, I'm ready to sell now, I'm never selling, or doesn't apply. And weigh in on this one, and then we're going to talk about what you have to be doing relative to the timing issue. And let me know when you're ready, guys.
Okay, I think we're ready.
Okay, great. So let's take a look at the answers to this poll question. The majority of you think you have about 2 to 3 years, some 4 to 5, and a little bit ready to sell now. and a few of you who are planning on never selling. So those of you who are planning on never selling, I want you to think about that answer, because the reality is, at some point, every business owner transitions out of the business, whether you go up straight up, walking out under your own steam, or you go out horizontal in a pine box. Someday you won't be here. And when that happens, there will be a transaction for the business. And I encourage you, even if it's handing it over to employees or family members, to think about that as a transaction. And I really encourage you to think about monetizing your asset rather than just closing it up. So talking about the timing issue, if you've got 1 year left, you're going to have to move really fast. Get as many support people as you can to help you with it. Delegate tasks, add experts. Don't try and go it alone. If you've got 3 years, that's pretty doable time, although I would say 5+ years is ideal. The more time you have, then you've got time to write out a plan to prepare for exit, stick to it, demonstrate that you can work the plan, and be sure that you've got both facts about what the business is worth now, and then what you have to do to make that value move up or move the needle on the value to get you where you need to go. So let's talk about what you have to do to prepare for exit. How many of these financial questions can you answer? This is the start of preparing. So is there a working plan? If the answer is no, then that needs to go on your task list. How am I going to build a working plan for the business? Keep in mind that a buyer wants to buy a business that they can get their hands around. And if there isn't enough documentation on how the business runs and how to keep it running and successful and what the future looks like, they're going to be much more hesitant to turn over a lot of money for the business. How profitable is the business? Well, this is a key question as well. And if the answer on this one is relatively low, then I would suggest that you work on this question, because when small businesses get sold, they get sold for the value of the profit. So if I'm a buyer, I am looking for cash flow, and I'm looking for the opportunity to increase cash flow. And that's what I'm going to pay money for, to get my hands on a business that I can make more cash flow out of in the future by continuing to grow and develop it. A key question for business owners, especially coming out of COVID, is how our debt's going to be paid off. So for you, those of you that have taken out idle loans, how are you going to pay those idle loans off? How are you going to get the obligations that the business does have paid out of the cash flow of the business, and then still have something else left over for you to take away from the table when you exit? Have you thought about tax planning and who's on your team to help with that? Because we're going to talk about we're going to keep coming back to this. It's not the size of the deal, it's how much you keep after the deal is done. Can we live on what we'll get? If you don't know the answer to that, that's a real important question to start, and get a financial planner to help you answer that question. And then finally, as you've gone through and worked on each of these questions, what's my answer? What do I have to do in order to improve the answer in each of these areas? Then the last question, the pros and cons. Do I delay or do I go now? And you want to keep asking this question every year. Do I go now or do I delay? As you prepare for the exit, I really want to remind you to let the baby grow up. What I mean by that is let the business become a sustainable company that doesn't need you. Here's some actions that you probably want to consider and implement, or put onto a to-do list to work on over the next couple of years. Things that you can and should be doing between now and exit that will help you build a sustainable company. You want to create a profitable growth model. Again, something you can hand over to a potential buyer that says, here's how you make money on this deal. You want to assemble one team inside the company with a common set of goals, open communication, shared wins. So the buyer wants to buy that team as part of what they're picking up in the sale. Or if you're going to sell it to your employees, you want them to understand how to run and develop this company and be effective at running it already before you hand it over. You want to invest in training and then get better every year. So you hand over a smart team and a smart company. We're better this year than we were last year. You want to teach people to be self-sufficient and accountable. You want to look through your organization. Who gets it? Who needs help learning to be self-sufficient and accountable? Is everybody in the right seat on the bus? Do we need to move anybody around, help people off? And then what gaps in the organization do we need to fill? You want to develop key performance indicators and accurate reporting, and that will help you with identifying the self-sufficiency and accountability. And then finally, as a business owner, take vacations. Get away from the business. A lot of business owners, when we survey this question, they'll say, hey, I'm lucky if I can get a week away from the business. Or I get away, but I take my laptop and my cell phone with me and I work every morning on the business while I'm away on vacation. What you don't want to be able to do is actually exit from the business, stay away, let the people that are there running it prove that they can do it. Whatever problems they get into, I guarantee you that in a week, they're not going to take the company down the rabbit hole completely. Come back, fix the problems, and then go away for 2 weeks of vacation. When you can go away for 2 weeks, go away for 3, 4, and so on. And I will tell you, we have a client who goes away for 6 months every year. This company is so sustainable and so capable of functioning that the owner does not have to be there. And that makes that company highly valuable to a future buyer who knows that you as a seller are not going to stick around all that long after you sell the company. The next buyer doesn't really care about you and wants proof that you can get out of the way and that you're not needed to run the company. Now, when you look at building up the company, you want to get strong on 6 platforms. You see some initials here. Those are sales, finance, marketing, operations, human resources, and then very important, leadership. As you work on those platforms and prepare to tell a buyer the story about the business, you want to make it compelling. So you want to promote what's best about your business, and then you want to be honest about the rest. Recognize that a buyer is going to find out where the holes are anyway as they go through the due diligence between a letter of intent and actual execution of the sale. One good proof source on all of this, as you see at the bottom here, is a set of plans. So a completed plan that says, here, we laid out our plan and we actually accomplished it. And then here's the plan going forward for the next several years, drafted up to show a buyer a successful path forward. You want to include in your plans that you have expertise in each discipline, that you have plans for up and down markets. You want to make sure that your numbers are bulletproof. I can't tell you how many times we see business owners who come to the table ready to sell with really vulnerable numbers. So the numbers aren't going to hold up in the future. Where you make money in the sale is not on what's offered in the letter of intent, but how well those numbers held up through due diligence. You want to then make sure you have an outstanding client portfolio, something of value that a buyer wants. Profitable clients who stick with you for a long time, keep coming back and buying more things, who really value what you do for them. And then finally, make sure that you do have handcuffs on key personnel who do need to stick with the company after the sale. What's their incentive for sticking around? You can give them a payout for sticking around for a period of time. You can make sure that they're wedded to the business and they have a strong future that they see in the business, that when the business goes through the sale, the future buyer knows who they are and is going to want those people and make sure that they hang on to them. There are a lot of ways to build key person handcuffs to make those people stay, but that's something you need to think about. It's going to be more than just a salary, especially in today's market where so many people are starting to walk and change jobs. Then in terms of the strategic owner questions, these are some things I want you to think about. How long is it going to take? What's my legacy? What happens to employees if I sell to outsiders or close up? What buyers might want what I have? Am I ready to let go? How well have I tested my team? Is my sweat equity worth as much as I think it is? What's my most profitable and tax effective sale? These are questions that you need to spend some time thinking about, writing out answers to, playing them out with yourself, your family members, and your employees as well. Let me tell you a few stories about folks that, like you, who have dealt with these questions. So we have a client, they're 10 years out from sale, but they are working right now on the development of their management team. So who's going to take the lead, or who is taking the lead in each area of the business? And within a year, they have gone from no vacations, completely backed up in terms of the business sits on their shoulders and feeling overwhelmed, to they're out of here for 3 weeks, then they take another 2 weeks, then they take a week and get away for a long weekend. And all of that is very deliberate on their part. And they're telling their employees, we're doing this because we want you to be able to run the business. And the only way that we can find out what else you're going to need is for us to get out of the way. It's working beautifully for them. In terms of the legacy question, we have a lot of clients that deal with this, whether it's family members who want their children to have the business, the kids are in the business and thinking about, do they want it or not? And so they're developing the plans so the kids understand what's that transition going to be like from the junior seat to the senior seat. There's a lot of family members who are in the junior seat and say, I watch what my parents have sweated for. I'm not so sure I want this business. So you've got to show them why is there value for holding and owning this business so that they do engage. We also see on the employee side, not enough business owners think about having their employees buy the business, and they don't plan enough for it and develop a methodology for the employees to take the business over. So employees come to the table, they usually don't have a lot of assets. There aren't enough assets inside the company to support the employees in the transition. You run up to the exit date and there's no way to get out and have the employees take it over. So you want to think about, how am I going to help my employees build up assets that they're going to be able to use in a transition? There's a lot of funding that's available. The SBA wants employees and outsiders to buy businesses. They want your business to stick around. They want that sale transaction to continue. They're going to have about 10 to 20% of the business value available in a down payment. If your employees are early stage, say they're millennials, and they don't have a lot of savings, and their assets are tied up probably in a down payment on a house and a mortgage, then you're going to have to create a bonus pool or some other form of compensation that's going to stick around inside the company and becomes a tool that they can use to buy the company and leverage the company, go to the SBA and say, hey, I've got the money to make this transaction work. I do see a lot of employers who are concerned about their employees and what's going to happen to my employees when I exit. And quite honestly, folks, if you sell to an outsider, that's not anything you're going to have any control over. The only way you're going to have some control over it is if it's bought by the employees. I will tell you, a lot of business owners get caught in the trap of, my employees could never run this company. I think that's a foolish thought process. First of all, you weren't as good at what you do as a business owner a long time ago. You had to learn. They can learn as well. You just have to create the opportunities for them to learn. And there may be some holes that you have to build in terms of additional expertise you're going to have to recruit to come into the company to round out the team. But I will tell you that employees tend to value the company higher than almost anyone else. They know how to run the company. Their jobs depend on the company continuing to be successful, and they want to see this mission to the end if you've done a good job of legacy planning. You also can go out and look for value buyers. So client that we worked with in the industry that they were in, they worked for 2 years to recruit a company that was very much like them, but much larger, and show that company why their company was the right asset for that company to pick up. It ended up being very successful. Not only were they able to transact the sale, they got to stick around for another 2 years, which they wanted to do, made great money, both on the value of shares that they hung on to and in terms of compensation that they received. And now they're reworking their agreement into another consulting agreement that will allow them to continue to make money and profit on the transaction. So don't overlook the opportunity to merge into a larger company and then take shares in the deal if that company is valuable. I will say, though, that there are a lot of companies where they come up to the deal, they realize their sweat equity isn't worth as much as they thought, and then they get a valuation done and they say, I can't afford to retire on this. They've got to go back in regardless of age and work it for another couple of years to get the business up to the value they want. You've got to be somewhat flexible depending on what you need to exit. And then lastly, make sure that you're looking at the tax planning consequences, because you may get a deal done for a lot of money and give up a huge portion of that money in tax planning. There's lots of ways to solve the question of how to transact the deal. Make sure that you do a transaction that's going to get you what you want. When you think about the next generation, whether that's employees or family members, you want to have conversations. Those of you that are thinking about bringing those people into the fold, you want to have conversations with them about, are you ready to run the company? And we've had a lot of clients where they've identified team members, family members, or employees. They want those people to take and run the company, but they're not ready to think like an owner. They're not ready to take on owner responsibilities that are both financial, like it's going to be me who's going to have to sign on the loans. Leadership, I'm the one who's going to have tough conversations with people. They're not ready to step out of the job they're doing day to day and step into that role of strategic planning and leading the company forward. Other traps that come up is that they're not, if you're talking about mom and dad as the owners and then juniors coming in, there's a disconnect between what the seniors want for the company and what the juniors want, and they don't have a good way to reconcile that conversation. Our recommendation is to do it through planning. So the juniors can show the seniors, I can get stuff done, I can move the needle. I just might be doing it differently from the way you might want to have done it, but it's enough to show you that I can run this company successfully. In the team that you're building, make sure that they are prepared for sales and marketing roles. So very often sales and marketing fall to the owners. They're the ones who take the lead. And as they step away, someone else is going to have to be very good at that role, and probably a bigger team than you've had in the past. Because if you're going to monetize this deal, if you're going to pay for the transaction as a buyer, you're going to have a bigger company than what you had when you purchased the company. So that means a bigger sales team, a bigger marketing effort, more successful interactions with more customers over a long period of time, selling a broader set of products or services. When you look at transacting that sale, I also do encourage the sellers to think about flexibility. So the more rigid you are about, I want to get paid at the day I exit, the lower the price generally will be. Now, it's the safest answer, but you will trade safety and risk for time. So if I'm going to allow myself to be paid over time, there may be more risk. The buyers might screw it up. But I will have probably have more money coming to me over a longer period of time. And there are things that you have to look at in terms of transacting that sale, how much cash sits in the business, does that come to the seller or does it stay in the business, what's sitting in accounts receivable. Again, we'll get into a lot of more detail on that when we do the valuation webinar next week, or next month. So I do encourage you to come back for that one as well. Let's wrap up by talking about who else needs to be on your team as a seller. So you want to build a team that's going to get you where you want to be. Financial planner is critical, and I would say get that team set up early on. This is somebody who's working with you on personal as well as business financial planning. Make sure that you've got asset valuation support, and within the last 3 to 5 years at least, that you're getting valuations done regularly. So you can see if you're moving the needle, increasing the value of the business, the things that you're implementing, you're demonstrating progress, and you can show that to a future buyer. Make sure that you've got someone who is going to work with you in terms of guidance on how deals work. I would tell you that most often business owners go into transactions and they don't even know what documents they're going to be looking at. So get someone who does a lot of deals. Something we saw this past year, it was a deal between two parties. They were merging two companies into one. It was a friendly merger. Everybody was in agreement as to how it would happen, but they went to the attorney they worked with for other business transactions, who was primarily a real estate attorney, had very little skill at transacting buyer-seller deals, ended up adding other attorneys to the process along the way, ran up big bills in the process, and dragged the deal out for an extra 6 months because there was so much coordination that was happening. What they really wanted to do in the beginning was get someone who does negotiations all the time, and on the attorney or legal side, someone who is used to doing these deals and documenting them and can provide a leadership role. You want to make sure that your attorney and your accountant are at the table, both for data gathering, for pricing, for contracting, and then for tax and estate planning advice. And that may be more than one firm or more than one individual. So here are some to-dos to get ready, actions that you can take. If time allows, and I wouldn't do this if you're 1 year out, but if you are 3 or more years out, I would absolutely do this. Do an acquisition. It gives you a chance to practice. It gives you a chance to experience what it's like to be on the buyer side of the table. It gives you a way to grow the company more quickly. And it gives you an opportunity to look at where the weaknesses are that then you can apply to your own company and say, hey, here's what I need to fix in my company. It's a great way to practice, but it does take usually about 3 years minimum to profit from a transaction. So make sure that you don't do it if your timeline's too short. As I said, if you want to do acquisitions, the SBA is there to help you. Reasonable interest rates, great opportunity to get the deals done. They really want to stretch to make it happen. And you're only going to need to put down 10%, maximum 20%, and the rest you'll be able to get through the SBA. Make sure that you do define your personal retirement goals and needs. We talked about that a lot as we've gone along here, but it's really important to talk about what kind of retirement do I want to have? What am I going to do in retirement? Am I going to travel? Am I going to get a retirement home and be able to live someplace else? What do I have laid away to take care of myself if something happens medically, if I need extra care? What does my spouse bring to the table in terms of supporting our retirement? And what am I going to have to do to take care of my spouse? Also, what do I want to pass on to my next generation or 2 generations down as legacy money, not just a company, but money that I'm going to send down line as I get ready to work my way through retirement and then have money left over when I'm done. Recruit and test your team of advisors. So you want to get your team of advisors together regularly. Treat it like a board. Meet with them a couple times a year. Make sure they can all work together and they all understand why they're working together and what their roles are, and that their roles are well defined. You can put a plan together for them to work on. How do we get ready for exit? And then that gives them time to practice with each other. Do a very, very strong assessment of your company, strengths, weaknesses, and gaps. You can use that team of advisors that you've formed to help you with that. You can get your employees involved in doing that assessment as well. Do research on buyer options and the marketplace. So what's out there? Who might want to buy this business? How is the marketplace changing? How do we fit into that marketplace? If you don't think you know how to do that, pay somebody to get that research done for you. You need to know what your options are, not just guess at it. Then you want to put together a short overview to introduce your company without giving too much away, something that when you start to talk to potential buyers, you can send it out and say, here's a quick snapshot. And then use this research on buyer options, the marketplace, to define your ideal buyer and start to do intros. I'm going to add some more to-dos for you to get the company ready for exit. So internally, you want to define roles among your operating and acquisition team members. So remember I said you need some outside advisors and then you need your employees working as team members. Then you got to put them together, make them all work together on, we're going to execute this sale together. Make sure that as you grow the company, you're actually maturing it. You're making it stand on its own. You're separating the identity of the company from your identity. You can live together, but you now stand separate, and make the numbers bulletproof. So every time you feel like there's a number that you have to go, here's a caveat, here's an explanation, that's a place where you have to do work. Be very clear what you want out of the deal. So what percent of the shares are you going to sell? Are you going to start out by selling 20% of the company, or are you going to sell 100% right out of the box? How much money do you want up front, and what are you going to use that money for? How much money are you going to be willing to put at risk, and what's the time frame in terms of each of these things happening? Look at contract examples. I touched on this a couple minutes ago. So ask your attorney who's got the experience at doing buy sells for examples of letters of intent and contracts of sale. Ask them to show you what you're going to have to read through, and read through them and realize this is what you're going to have to negotiate with your advisors and with including your attorney and anybody who's helping to negotiate the deal. Define how much risk you'll trade for a payout and set minimums. Like, here is as low as I am willing to go, so that you don't get negotiated lower than that once you get into a transaction. You know when to walk away. This deal just isn't going to happen. Once it's time to actually get into the deal, so again, especially for you guys that are in the last year and ready to do this, get to know your buyers. See if you can line up 2 or 3 potential buyers and get to know them well. When you are talking to potential buyers, you're going to have to figure out, do I trust them? Are they stand-up people? Will they do what they say and say what they do? When I work on negotiating something with them, are they straightforward about the negotiation, or are they always weaseling and wheedling on it? You want to make sure that you are working with people that you've got good evidence, you can trust them and work with them, because I got to tell you folks, getting a deal done, from getting from the LOI, the letter of intent, to the execution of the sale can be months of effort. And in that process, lots of things can go wrong. So you want to make sure you've got people that are at the table, not trying to take advantage of you any more than is fair or appropriate relative to the information that they're finding out. Get really clear about what you will and won't accept as negotiation behaviors. I've had clients walk away from the table. Fortunately, most of them walk away pretty early on. Look, I just don't like the way they're trying to negotiate or renegotiate. I don't like what the conditions they're trying to put into the letter of intent. Or we've got the letter of intent, but they're now not trying to stick stuff into the contract of sale that were never brought up in the letter of intent. I'm not working with that. Make sure that you're clear what your boundaries are. Don't feel like you have to stay at the table. I do suggest that you ask for a walk away good faith fee from anyone who does engage with you. And what that is 10, 20, 30, $40,000 or more. If they get some numbers from you, they get some information from you, and then they walk away. What you want to make sure that you don't just deal with tire kickers. And so they have a reason to stay at the table or get ruled out because they are just tire kicking. And that's what a good faith fee will do for you. Use the letter of intent to define the rules of engagement. Here's how we're going to work together to get from here to the executed deal. You should be prepared for due diligence and negotiation between the letter of intent and the actual sale contract. And again, talk with the people who are going to negotiate for you. Their negotiating work is not done after the letter of intent is signed. There's more work to be done on what information is being conveyed, the questions about is that information what the buyer understood would be there, and how does that get measured in terms of changes to the deal. You're going to have to negotiate the sale contract. As I said, it can take months to get there. I get people who come to me a lot of times and they say, hey, I want to sell in the next couple of months. And the thing I'll tell them is pretty unlikely. It just takes time to get these deals done. And then you have to figure out, lastly, and most importantly, what are you going to do next? So what you want to think about in terms of this, what are you going to do next, is that a lot of business owners don't separate from the company because they don't have a clear vision of what comes next. And they think about leaving the business as a form of failure. And instead, what you want to think about is leaving the business as a form of opportunity. Here's what I get to go do next. Make that picture clear and have it in front of you as you're working through all the challenges that you are going to have to deal with as you get through the sale. Oops, sorry. And then some final considerations. So it's keep this slide at the forefront of your thought process as you plan and execute the sale. As I said earlier, how good is your buyer? How much can I trust them? How strong and profitable is my company? How well do I and my team negotiate? And this is when you got to think about, owners are used to being in control. But when it comes to negotiating the sale, you need to step back. You need to have people who are negotiating on your behalf